I'm now happy to introduce Suzanne Flint.
Hi, welcome back as we begin our second online course. It was inspiring to follow all your various discussions and the honest and open exchange that so many of you shared in the first course. We really appreciate the high level of engagement that you've brought to this coursework to date. I also want to thank Mary Jane Naquin for her terrific course on strategic facilitation. It's a topic that's particularly challenging to deliver online, and she did a great job. But the course may have left many of you with more questions than answers. Don't worry, that's just what we'd expect, and it's a perfect place from which to begin this community assessment class. This class will be all about how to refine those questions and get the input you need to start arriving at the answers. For those of you feeling overwhelmed, let me take a moment to say we know we are presenting lots of content. Keep in mind that we have fellows working at all levels of experience and in all types of library environments. Therefore, we've asked each instructor to strive to provide a baseline of information on each topic so that there will be something of relevance for everyone. But that doesn't mean that everyone has to do everything. What we do ask is that you at least review all course content, reflect on it, do what exercises you can, and when feasible, act on it. But putting the information into action in your library can come with time. Clearly, the more you can do now as a part of this course, the more guidance and support you'll have in the process from all of the faculty and us. However, if you're new to any of the class topics, or if you're not yet ready to start that particular process, feel free to review course content and save it for the future when you are ready. And for those of you with more experience and who may have already undertaken a community assessment, for example, we invite you to offer your own lessons learned and look for opportunities to refine your existing skills. Bottom line, take the information shared, adapt it, and apply it as you need to. We also encourage you to trust your instincts. Try things and give yourself permission to make mistakes. Let others know you are learning or practicing, and perhaps even invite them to join you in that process. Finally, at the request of many of you while we were in Portland, we are adding a concluding webinar to the fellowship. It will provide an opportunity for Stephen and I to sum up the year-long experience, and for the online faculty and all of you to share parting comments. So mark your calendars for Thursday, June 16th, 2011, from noon to 1 Pacific time. We'll also post a notice on the Ning. So before I introduce Cindy, remember that Mary Ross and I will be assisting Cindy today and all future webinar instructors by monitoring both the chat and Q&A. There will be breaks in Cindy's presentation when Mary and I will review the comments posted in chat and the questions posted in Q&A, and Cindy will have an opportunity to respond. To help us help Cindy, please be sure to differentiate your posts with comments that you want to share with Cindy and or the other fellows in chat, and specific questions for which you want Cindy's response in the Q&A. Cindy Mediavilla is a former public librarian who currently works as a library programs consultant for the California State Library and as a lecturer for the UCLA Department of Information Studies. She has years of experience and expertise in assessing library services throughout California. We're lucky to have her guiding us through this community assessment piece. Cindy?
Hello all, this is Cindy Mediavilla. Thank you, Suzanne, for that nice introduction and for reminding everyone how to use chat and the Q&A part. I'm thrilled that we have 74 people so far. That's probably about a 75% attendance rate, which is a pretty good sample. It's something that you'll be learning more about next week when we talk about sample sizes. I do work for the State Library, and I do teach for the UCLA Department of Information Studies. My area of expertise is usually teenagers and after-school homework programs. So why on earth am I here with you all talking about boomers? Well, it's because I was born in 1953, and along with my husband, we're both baby boomers, and we really love our generation. We just love everything about being boomers and the music and everything. So I want to make sure that libraries are able to meet my generation's information and service needs, and that's what drew me to this project 2 years ago when the California State Library started thinking about helping libraries with meeting the particular needs of baby boomers. I've done lots of, I've used a lot of the instruments that we'll be talking about over the next couple of weeks in particular, but also today, in doing evaluations of library programs. I've had lots of experience with writing grants, which means I've had lots of experience doing needs assessments. And I have used environmental scans, surveys, focus groups, and have done key informant interviews, all these techniques that we'll be talking about over the 3 weeks of the community assessments course. I've also taught several workshops and classes on these topics. So I'm going to be bringing you all that expertise to the coursework and to our short webinar today. Most importantly, I want you to know that I'm here to help you as you venture forward in assessing your communities. I know that this topic can be intimidating and that needs assessment isn't necessarily the most scintillating topic of conversation, although I have to admit, I really like talking about coming up with a strategy on how to assess community needs, or at the end of a project, how to evaluate the effectiveness of a project. But I know that I'm kind of unusual in that regard. So let me assure you that I've tried to make our next 3 weeks together as interesting and accessible as possible by using hypothetical scenarios and by providing lots of handouts and examples that you can use later to design and carry out your own community assessments if you feel that they're appropriate. Though I'll be sharing lots of assessment techniques with you, no one is expecting you to drop everything and immediately run out and assess your community. My purpose here is to provide you with the tools and knowledge on how to conduct a community assessment so that when it comes time for you to actually do it, you'll be ready. While I hope you'll participate in the workshop over the next 3 weeks, the nice thing about this type of workshop is that you can print out the content and revisit it later when you actually decide to do a community assessment. So I would encourage you all to take advantage of being able to print out the content and the handouts so that later on when you're ready to do your needs assessment, you can refer back to the content that we put together for you for the next 3 weeks. Okay, so what's the purpose of today's webinar? Well, the first thing is to reinforce the importance of assessing your community's needs before developing library services and programs for midlife adults. And this is a theme I'm going to kind of be pounding on you over the next 3 weeks, that really, as well as we know our communities, it's always good practice to actually go out into the community and ask our community members what their needs are before we spend a lot of time designing programs for them that may not actually meet their real needs. So we always need to do an assessment first. I'm also hoping to get you excited about conducting these assessments because it can be a good excuse for actually getting some good, healthy face time with your clients or your customers. And finally, today I want to familiarize you with how to conduct an environmental scan, which is the process of doing background research on both your community and your library to see if your library is ready to take on a new project. So let's start with a quick poll to kind of see where you guys are. Raise your hand if you have conducted surveys either online or via paper. And I don't mean that you've participated in surveys. I mean that you actually helped construct the questions or you helped administer the survey by handing out the surveys, or you helped tabulate the results at the end. So let's see here how many folks have actually had experience doing this. Yikes. Lots of you. Let's see. Let's give you another couple of seconds here. So it looks like about 47 of you, so a vast majority of you have had experience already with actually pulling surveys together. That's excellent. So that's a really good piece of data for me to know. Let me ask you the next one then. How many of you have actually helped conduct focus groups? And again, I don't mean that you actually were the person being asked the questions. I mean you either helped put the questions together, or you facilitated the focus group, or the hard part, you helped code and tabulate the data after the focus group. Let's take a couple of seconds to see how many people have actually done that. Very good. Looks like 33, 34, so a little less than half, but still that's a very healthy amount of people who have actually done that kind of process. Okay, take your hands away, and now let me ask you, how many of you have done key informant interviews? Same thing, not that you were interviewed, but that you put the questions together. And this differs from, I know you all did the intentional conversations for Mary Jane's part of the Institute. This is a little different in that you, with key informant interviews, you purposely identify people out in the community who have a particular expertise about the population group that you're interested in gathering data about. And only 5 of you have ever done key informant interviews. Well, a little bit more. Let's take a few seconds here. So about 10 of you, which I'm not surprised, because this is probably out of all of these methods is possibly the one that less people know about. So one more poll, environmental scans. How many of you have actually done environmental scans? And I know some of you have because you've talked about it already on Moodle, but an environmental scan would be where you get background information about your community and your library to see if the library is ready to take on a new project. So let's wait a couple of seconds here. Okay, so about a third of you have done environmental scans, which is great. So you can definitely take your hands away now. Thank you. Be sure to pipe in with any experience that you've had as we're going through our webinar today, and certainly on Moodle. I'd love for you to share your experience. I'm not surprised to see that the majority of you have had experience with surveys and focus groups, and then fewer of you have had experience with environmental scans and key informant interviews. All of these techniques, I'm hoping by the end of our 3-week course, you'll all feel much more comfortable with these techniques by the end of the 3 weeks. Okay, so what I want to do now is define the 2 words that are of most importance to this particular course, which of course are community and assessment. So community, I'm going to talk a lot about community over the next 3 weeks, and when I'm talking about community, I mean the target population the library exists to serve. If we are doing our jobs well, our libraries are reflecting the uniqueness of the particular community we are serving. And it's your community really that helps make your library distinct from all other libraries. Again, if you're doing a really good job at serving your community base. And the example that I use in the course is the large library of Los Angeles Public Library, which is where I live, so it's the one that maybe I'm the most familiar with, that has tons of branches. And even in a library like that, which is serving the needs of the city of Los Angeles, each branch reflects the unique needs of the individual community that that branch is serving. And the example I use is the Chinatown branch versus the Hollywood branch. And you can guess how each of those branches would have a totally different community base that the librarians then would create services and programs for to reflect those communities. In this institute, in the fellowship, we are talking about a particular subset within our larger communities, and those, of course, are baby boomers. They are the key demographic we're addressing in this project. So when you do your community assessment, you may decide to do research just on the boomers as opposed to looking at the entire community. That would make the process perhaps a little less onerous for you if you focused on just that particular subset. The other word I want to define, of course, is assessment. And an assessment is a process for gathering the information you need to know before planning a new library service. Assessment differs from evaluation in that evaluation measures the effectiveness of a service or program that is either already in process or just ended. So with an evaluation, what you're doing is you're looking at a program that already exists or just ended. So you're kind of looking backwards at what has already happened and deciding whether you were effective or not. With an assessment, you are looking forward. You're gathering information to help you plan a new program. So you're looking forward with assessment. And even though the instruments that you'll use for assessment and evaluation often are the same instruments, one process is looking forward, the other is looking backward. And of course, we'll be talking more about evaluating results towards the end of the fellowship, because that's when evaluation naturally occurs. So a lot of what you're going to learn here in the assessment piece may seem like a lot of content that we're throwing at you, but feel assured that some of this stuff you're going to be able to apply when you hear from me again in March. So you're kind of getting double duty this time. Now, let me ask you this. This is almost like a little quiz for those of you who have already been on the Moodle reading the content for this course. But in the chat box now, why don't you tell us why you think community assessments are important? If you've already done community assessments, this would be a good time to tell us about some of the benefits or information or things that you learned from that particular experience. So go ahead and chat and start sharing your comments. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and give you some good reasons why to do a community assessment, and we'll see if your ideas line up with mine. Community assessment is a good way to reach out to your stakeholders to get input and make community contact. And this is a point that MJ made in her course when she was talking about using community assessment to possibly identify some key people in the community that you then would ask to be on your project advisory board. So that's often a very good outcome of doing a community assessment. Community assessments are also a good way to get input from non-users. And sometimes we focus so much on the people that are already using the library that we forget that there's a whole other group of people out there that may even need our services more than the people who normally come in. So community assessment will help you identify non-users and reach out to them. The two biggie reasons why we do community assessment, of course, are to provide real data on which to make decisions about new library services and programs. Now, personally, I'm not an idea person. You know, I tend to think of people as people who have good ideas, and then there are people who are given an idea and run with it, and they're more task-oriented. I'm in the latter camp. I'm a really good task person, but I'm also a pretty good problem solver, and I see community assessment as a way to help solve problems. You're collecting data to help you plan a service that meets a community need or solves a problem. If we don't ask our customers what they need, or our community at large what it needs, then we may end up providing a service that doesn't really improve the lives of our particular community members. And actually, at the Portland Institute, I was talking to one of the fellows, and he was telling me that his library has a track record of offering lots of different services to the community. But he has observed that when the library ran off and started a service without first talking to the community to see if it was even a service that fit their needs, that often those services just kind of bombed. They didn't really meet the needs because no one ever asked what the needs were. So there is a real-life example of a library that really needs to do more community assessment before starting some of these new programs and services. The other reason we do, the other big reason to do community assessments, of course, is to get funding. When you establish constituent need, you can better position the library among other departments, agencies, et cetera, when it comes time to compete for budget dollars. And I'm sure you know that when you're sitting down with the city manager or the county board of supervisors and the sheriff's department or the police department or the fire department come in, they're armed with all kinds of statistics about how much their services are needed in the community, and so they justify why they need to get the big bucks when it comes time to doling out the budget dollars. We need to do the same thing, and the way we do that is by going out to the community, establishing that there is a need, and then translating that need into budget dollars, which we can then say, this is the need in the community, this is how much it's going to cost to meet that need. Now, please give us the budget that our community deserves. So, Mary, what are some of the other things that people mentioned as reasons why community assessments are important?
Well, that question engendered a lot in the chat window. It's pretty amazing, Cindy, and quite a number of people have mentioned just exactly what you said about determining what the community needs. Targeting is another word that's used. Target services to meet the needs of the community were mentioned by Leslie, Gina, Jana, Christine, Jennifer, Jessica, Valerie, etc., Sally. A lot of people talked about the getting the best bang for your buck with your community. So again, targeting those community needs. Interesting comment from Marion about updates data sets that may be dated.
Oh, interesting. I love that.
And so Stephen said to see what people want out of your organization so we don't wander around blindly.
Good.
Again, mentioning community needs and wants. Oh, so, a number of people mentioned comments about programs. So we don't give programs no one comes to. Jenny Brewer mentioned that.
Yeah.
And so we figure out what our users need as opposed to what we think that they need.
Yes, good.
A number of people mentioned money issues. Colleen mentioned money issues. We don't want to put things together that we don't need.
Yes.
Specifically, to understand what the people are in our community and what they want. Jennifer Fenton mentioned gains community buy-in and support.
Excellent.
And Karen Spiel mentioned community assessment is important because we need to be sure the programs and services we offer are relevant. And a couple of people gave some examples. Dale Savage gave an example of a new baby time program might not be the best program in a restricted retirement community.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that targeting of the services to the specific needs. And I'm scrolling down here. Good comment from Donna Pierce. It lets us see a broader view of the community, not just those who are coming into the library.
Excellent.
And Nancy Kerr had quite a comprehensive response to this. Programming decisions, collection development, space planning, assessing satisfaction or the contrary prior to a referendum. So that tie to a vote, maybe a referendum, a bond measure, et cetera.
Excellent, excellent.
And good comment from Keith. We need to know what the people who are paying our wages want from the library.
Good. Excellent.
Another good example, this one from Paige, to see how many community members read Spanish and how many would prefer to check out Spanish language materials, for example. And then Diane mentioned that with a large unincorporated county library district, area plans for using resources wisely to meet the best needs of local demographic in a widespread area. And we'll be able to capture these too. We can get a transcript of this. And I see a comment from Christine. Another reason to ask people what they want or need is that it gets them invested. Gain that feedback that someone else talked about. If their input feeds into a new service, they'll be likely to use it and talk about how responsive the library is.
Excellent.
So very good comments. And Suzanne may have gotten some in the Q&A section as well.
Actually, we only have one question, and it's a little bit back on one of the things that Cindy was talking about earlier, and you may get to it later, but let me throw it out there to you, Cindy. Jeff Kempe has asked, is an environmental scan the same thing as a community study?
The answer is yes, kinda, because there's two parts to the environmental scan, which we're going to actually, as soon as we're done chatting here, that's the next thing we're going to talk about. You're studying the community, but then the other key element is that you look inwardly to see if the library has the capacity to take on a new project or a new program. So there's two parts. There's the external and the internal. So it's sort of 50% yes to your question.
Great. That was our only question for now.
Okay, great. Let me just comment very quickly about some of the chat responses. I like that someone mentioned it's a good way to update data because that shows that you understand that you don't just do a community assessment once. You do it, really should do it every time you're thinking of offering a new service. So yes, that would be updating the data, although you don't need to do, actually some people feel that you should be constantly doing an environmental scan, which I think is something that really you should be doing, but you don't always have to do a focus group or a survey. But yes, the process is iterative in that you should be doing it many different times. You don't say, oh, 5 years ago we did this survey and think you can create a whole new service based on data that are 5 years old. So yes, it's something you need to update the data frequently. I like that people are mentioning that they should do community assessments before planning programs because, you know, we don't have the luxury anymore, not that we ever did, to offer services that no one is going to come to. We just don't have the time to use all that effort to put on programs that no one's going to want to participate in. So doing the community assessment will help you figure out ahead of time whether or not this program is going to fly or not. And then lots of, I wrote down the word accountability. Remember, the community is the target population the library exists to serve. The library is there because there's a community there. The library doesn't just pop up because all of a sudden, someone who loves books and information says, let's start a library. It exists because there's a community there that has a specific need, and we need to be accountable to the people, exactly as one of the fellows said, who pay for our ability to have the library there. So, okay, I think I'll go on unless there's any other burning things that either Mary or Suzanne want to add.
Cindy, I just saw one comment here that you may want to address this as you go on to environmental scanning. A couple people mentioned that rural versus urban is a big consideration.
Yes.
And that there are different factors. So that just came up in the chat as
well. Yes, and we're going to actually, that's a perfect segue because that's what we're going to talk about within the next 5 minutes. So let's look at what the environmental scan is, since it is something that not many of you are that familiar with. An environmental scan is a process for gathering background information that will help you design services and programs specifically for your community. It helps you identify what data already exists about your community, and it helps you identify what further information you need to collect through surveys, interviews, and focus groups before you go ahead and start planning new programs. So that's the external piece, where it helps you, the environmental scan helps you identify data or gather data about your community. The other piece, as I mentioned already, is the internal part of the environmental scan, and that's where you're looking at the library's strengths and weaknesses so you can decide whether the library even has the capacity to take on a new project. So because you're doing all this background research, that's why the environmental scan should be the first step in the community assessment process. Now, to help you with the process, we have created a couple of worksheets that I hope you were able to review and copy off and have at your fingertips here while we're doing the webinar. The worksheets are in the supplementary material for this week's workshop or course. And there's an external, one for gathering external data, and there's one for gathering internal data. For those of you who already have an idea of what service you'd like to provide to your baby boomer community, the worksheets will help you collect external and internal information pertinent to the project that you already have rattling around in your head. So you could actually focus the worksheet on a particular topic of possible programming, and that will help you with doing the research to see if indeed this kind of program is something your community would be interested in. For those of you who don't yet know what type of service you might want to provide your boomer community, the environmental scan may help you identify potential problems that might be resolved through possible new library services. So if you don't have any idea yet what you want to do, the hope is that these forms can help you gather information about your community and the library. And as you're looking through the information that you gather, then some certain themes or needs will pop out at you where you would then say, oh boy, this looks like something maybe the library could tackle. The worksheets each have 3 columns. The left-hand column describes the factors that you might want to research. Now, you don't have to research all of these factors necessarily, but these are some pretty important elements to consider when looking at whether or not to provide a new service. You know, things like demographics and the urban versus rural, that kind of thing. The second column we've designed so that you can actually write down the data that you find, the information that you gather. And the third column is where you list the source of the information. Now, I loved Holly's Moodle comments today about how important it is to write down the sources of the information that you gathered, because at some point you might want to refer back to these forms, and if you don't write down your sources, you're going to scratch your head and go, yikes, where did we find this? We need to look at this again. Or there's always the fact that as good library people, we have an ethic of citing sources. So we've included that third column for you so you can cite your sources. So let's look at the two, what type of information would be collected first in the external form or the external environmental scan. And as I'm going through these different elements or factors, be thinking about what might be missing here on this form. I have to tell you that I pretty much invented these forms because nothing existed. Very little literature has been written about doing environmental scans about libraries. But what does exist, I did read, and then I went outside the library literature as well to try to identify very important factors. But I still might have missed stuff. So as I'm talking, in the chat box, be sure to add any elements that I might miss so that we can fix up the forms or share with your colleagues here what might be missing. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water. Okay, probably the most obvious factor would be demographics. These, of course, would be what ethnicities are in your community, what languages are spoken, educational levels, income levels, household size, etc. Obviously, the place to go would be the census, and my understanding is that in February, the new census figures will be out just in time for your projects. But there are other sources as well. Chambers of Commerce collect these kind of data as well because they're trying to attract businesses into the community. Local planning departments, city planning departments or county planning departments, they also collect these kind of data. The school district may collect data that would be valuable. And read your local newspaper because the newspaper is probably going to have articles on distinct populations in the community. Setting is another important factor. Geographical certainly is important, but this is where you start thinking about the ramifications of rural versus urban, which I know is an issue for a lot of you. Rural areas may have totally different needs than urban communities. Climate or seasons also may inform the type of services that you offer. And my favorite example of this is I worked for 10 years for the San Diego County Library, and one of the branches that I was in charge of was the Julian Library. Now, if you know San Diego County, you probably have heard of Julian, which was an old mining town up in the mountains, a really sweet little town. The branch there had a very kind of unique situation from all the other branches in San Diego County in that during the winter, the people who lived in the city, the little town of Julian, would listen to the weather report in the morning, and if it was going to snow, everyone would run into the library to check out the DVDs and books in case they got snowed in. So that definitely had an impact on library services. In the summer, on the other hand, people who lived in the desert, which is not too far from Julian, would come and live in Julian during the hot summer months, and that also had an impact on library services. So that would be something, if I were doing an environmental scan for Julian, for instance, those are things that I would pay attention to that may help define an area that the library could provide services because of the seasons and the weather. Also under setting would be housing trends. So again, sources for that type of information, Chamber of Commerce, real estate agencies, they do some data collection too. Housing agencies can help you with the number of homeowners versus the number of renters, which may be an important piece of data that you would need to know. Again, newspaper articles and your own eyeballs. You're going to, with your own eyes, know whether it's rural versus urban and what some of the implications of that might be. The economy, of course, who are the major employers in town, employment versus unemployment. Is your community mostly retired people, or do most people still work? Is the economy, the local economy, stable, or is it on a decline? And again, the chamber and newspaper articles can help you with that, but also we've provided links in the course content to the U.S. Department of Labor and Bureau of labor statistics that would help you identify some employment trends in the local area. Technology. How technologically sophisticated are the people in your community? Do most people have computers and internet, or are they struggling to have computers, or maybe they have computers but no internet? And are there other agencies in town that provide training opportunities on how to use the computer? If there are lots of educational venues like community colleges and high schools and maybe like Learning Annex or Extension that already offer computer courses, then maybe that's nothing that the library needs to worry about. But if there aren't, maybe that's an area where the library could step in and provide services. And you find that out through the telephone book and by asking local educational venues. Sociocultural. This is where you take a look around and see what activities are available in the community. Are there cultural activities? Are there a lot of recreational activities? How healthy is the community? What kind of health statistics? Is this a robust, healthy community, or are there factors there that contribute to people not being very healthy? And then general opportunities within the community. Places to look for that kind of information: AARP Research Center can help you with some of the health issues, health departments, and then, of course, and newspaper articles. So, what did I not include that would help you when you do your external environmental scans? Mary, have we gotten some good feedback on that?
Yes, we have gotten a couple of good ideas, Cindy, for something to add to those worksheets. Jacqueline said state almanacs usually have data about counties.
Good.
Marshall Shapiro said the demographics of the senior centers are a good source, too, and the settings for senior centers.
Good.
Rebecca mentioned lifestyle market analysis.
I'm not sure what that is, but...
Yeah, maybe Rebecca can explain that a little further in the chat box, please. Anita Johansson mentioned school districts also gather data that's helpful since they're focused on smaller areas of the community.
Yeah.
And let's see, I'm going to go back to the chat window because a lot has come in since then. United Way also does some of this kind of sociocultural data prep. Lynn mentions Agency on Aging. Jenny Brewer mentions zipskinny.com, which I'm not familiar with. Maybe, Jenny, you could chat a little bit more about that as well. Health statistics would the local hospital share those.
Interesting.
General information, not patron or patient data, but would they share statistics on that? And Alan mentions about interviewing key informant participants, and that I know you're going to talk about in key informant interviews.
Yes.
Oh, this is an interesting comment from Carrie. Walking around the community and observing the day-to-day life is very useful.
Absolutely.
And Terry Beck mentions our local PSRC. I'm not sure what that acronym is, Terry, so could you put that in the chat window also? Sharon mentions neighboring retirement communities. And Terry also says ESRI tapestries are also useful. Community information. Oh, and here's an explanation from Dale. ZipSkinny aggregates census data by zip code. Okay. State Library collects lots of demographic and economy information. Oh, Sally has an interesting comment about knowing people who can serve as connectors can put you in touch with key people. Again, that comes into that key informant topic. Regional councils. Oh, that's from Terry. Puget Sound Regional Council is that acronym. Thank you, Terry. And Rebecca says Lifestyle Market Analysis is a book published every few years that gives popular activities and trends in towns across the U.S. Okay. And Hannah mentioned sit-in on city council meetings.
Good idea.
Interesting.
That's always a good idea.
So, lots of input here. Let me make sure I got everything from the, okay, and I got those already. So yeah, lots of really good comments. And I just wanted to point out to you, Cindy, too, a couple of the fellows are very appreciative of these forums because they think they'll be helpful with strategic planning processes.
Good. Excellent.
For
good,
them.
Good. Suzanne, anything to add?
Well, a couple of things. One is you may actually be getting to as we move forward here about, is there, if you do all of this assessment, is there a sort of a magic percentage that will then indicate whether or not what you're planning is likely to succeed? That's a question from Rebecca. I don't know if she's asking for sort of maybe statistical significance.
Well, at this point, you're just doing background information. I think where magic numbers come in is when you then figure out, okay, this looks interesting, let's dig a little deeper, and that's when you do focus groups and surveys. But as far as environmental scanning, I've never heard of any sort of magical number that then ensures that you're going to have success.
And then Maggie has, I guess she's not actually asking a question, but she's also offering contacting your local political representative's office because they often maintain much of this community assessment.
Excellent point. Excellent
data.
point. Good. Okay, excellent. Thank you all for that input. And you can adjust the forms in whatever way you need to meet your own particular needs. So please feel free to adapt the forms to your own situations. I'm going to zoom through the internal because we are getting close to, I do want to leave time for Q&A. So the second form is for internal environmental scan. And these are all the different things that you would collect information about the library's history, its track record with introducing new services, what the service priorities are, and of course you would know that by looking at hopefully your mission statement and your goals and objectives and any sort of strategic plan that you've already done. Human assets, of course, are staff as well as volunteers. What strengths do staff bring to the table? What languages do they speak? What ethnicities do they represent? What knowledge base do they have? Do you have any in-house people who could do training, either of staff or of the public? And the same thing with volunteers. What strengths do they bring to the table? Non-human resources, of course, are collection, the facility, meeting room. If you take on a new project, are you going to have space to do it in the library, or are you going to have to go outside the building and maybe partner with another agency that does have space? Funding, is your funding stable? And where do you get the funding? Is it mostly tax-based, or is there another revenue stream? How successful have you been with grants? Technology, it's one thing to measure or to look at the technological sophistication of the community. How old is your own computer stuff in the library? Is it too old to really start doing a new fancy computer training project? That's something you need to look at in some sort of internal inventory. And also, how willing are staff to not only take on new projects, but how willing are they to learn new technology? And then, of course, partnerships and library support. Do you have a good friends group? Do you have a foundation? What are your partnerships in the community, either formally or informally? And, of course, these are all the different tools you would use to kind of suss that out. Don't forget strategic plan, annual reports, budget documents. These are all important documents that can help you decide what the strengths and weaknesses are of your library, and library history, scrapbooks, and, of course, institutional memory. You want to talk to staff about this, too, because they will often be a good judge as to whether or not this is something that would fly in the community and whether they can take it on as something new. Now, I was going to ask you what else. I don't know that we necessarily have time. Why don't you start in the chat box anything else about doing an internal scan that we might have missed, other good leads for us, while I then go ahead and talk about once you've collected all these data, what happens next. So go ahead and do the chat. So you've done your scan. Once the data are collected, you should have a pretty good picture of your community situation and what some of the issues are that are affecting the baby boomers in your community. You should also have a good idea of where more information is needed to help you design effective library programs and services. Again, as you do your scan, some real problems might pop up, and you might say, "Ooh, let's dig a little deeper in here." And that's when you follow up and get more detailed information through surveys, focus groups, and key informant interviews. Again, methodologies that we'll be discussing over the next couple of weeks. Last word of advice here, and then we'll do Q&A and look at your chat responses. I want to emphasize again that no one is expecting you to run right out and start conducting community assessments. In fact, I think a better strategy may be for you to experience a couple of more courses, because there's a lot of expertise that we still have to share with you. And then once you've gone through the other workshops, then you might start thinking about approaching your community about creating services for midlife adults. If you want to at least start testing the waters, then starting with an environmental scan will help you decide how you might want to proceed. It's okay if you are only in the very preliminary stages of your planning process. This week's assignments will help you decide whether you and the library are even ready to proceed with conducting an environmental scan. There is no rush. You can always print out the coursework and use it later on when you're ready to proceed. And I want to assure you that I am here to help you if you have any questions or you just don't know how to get started. So, Mary, any good input on internal scans that we need to share?
Yes, there were a couple of really good comments here, Cindy. Deborah Peterson mentioned that her library has board minutes going back to the early 1900s, so where there are records of board actions.
Yeah, excellent.
And Marshall Shapiro mentioned that his library has an extensive scrapbook collection that includes program flyers.
Fun.
Corey Bard mentioned human capacity. He mentioned the volunteer program that he has at his library, as well as the fact that networking and in identifying people's skills in the community that can help you is really key to this process.
Mm-hmm.
And Alan Byrne had an interesting comment that the capacity should include budget from the beginning. Many grants can allow applying for staff time in budgeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I see another comment from Elizabeth that, this is interesting, a guest comment book that goes back to the first library.
Wow.
That could be helpful.
That's neat.
And Dale Savage mentioned Google News alerts that can help with monitoring relevant news articles in a particular location.
Good. Excellent. Good.
I see a comment from Jennifer Hills. Sperling's Best Places also has some interesting demographic information. Mm-hmm.
Good.
Okay.
Suzanne, any input or any Q&A? And now we can open it up to Q&A if people have other questions.
No one has posted any other specific questions at this point, though I was just scanning through chat, and it does look like, I guess Leslie was asking about possible LSTA grants. And in California, we are going to be moving forward with that possibility. I know Oregon is also inviting fellows to consider LSTA grants, as is Idaho. So there are different possibilities out there, and we're also working on getting together a potential funders list. So even though you may not be ready to start the whole process now, I just wanted you to know that there are going to be, and it looks like some promising opportunities down the road where all of these skills are going to be important and will help you in getting various funding opportunities. So we'll have more information about that on the NING.
And Cindy, I see a comment from Donna Pierce that was placed in the chat, actually a question that was placed in the chat. She says, how do you convince people, particularly city officials, that a community-wide assessment is necessary?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the people that you need to convince maybe before you even convince city officials is your library director, who might be reluctant, especially if it's staff who's going to have to conduct this thing. The library director then would talk to the city manager or whoever. It seems peculiar to me that city officials wouldn't understand the need to go out into the community to find out what services are needed, especially in a time of fiscal austerity when every dollar counts. Why would we want to do programs that are not going to result in people showing up at them? Why would we want to waste the taxpayers' money doing programs that are not meeting their needs? To me, that's the biggest argument in favor of doing community assessment. Maybe other people have other ideas too. Any other questions?
Doesn't look like it at this point. I think people are pretty engaged and excited to, continue the conversation.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you'll have the opportunity to continue the conversation over the next 3 weeks during the course. And we've already had some really good input. I'm very excited every time I go into the course and see all the comments. It's fun to see that people are reacting to the workshop.
Well, thanks, Cindy. I think that's a great overview and a good beginning, and I'm going to be following along with great interest as the conversations continue in Moodle.